Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa with news from across the continent. I'm Clarisse Fortuné. Coming up on the program. Pope Leo's journey in Africa continues. In Angola, the pontiff slammed exploitation and corruption by the rich and powerful before 40,000 faithful at an open-air mass in the city of Saurimo. Fighting is still going on in northern DRC in spite of a U.S. brokered peace agreement. But now the Democratic Republic of Congo government and the M23 rebel group say they have agreed to ease humanitarian aid deliveries and release prisoners within 10 days. In Mali, escalating violence is driving a growing exodus. Every week, more than 1,000 people flee across the border into Mauritania, seeking safety from armed groups. But as international aid dries up, overcrowded camps are reaching breaking points. Pope Leo was in Saurimo in northeast Angola on Monday as part of his third and final day in the country. As tens of thousands gathered for mass and prayers, he slammed exploitation and corruption by the rich and powerful. On Tuesday, he will be heading to the final leg of his journey, Equatorial Guinea. Clémence Valère with this recap of the day's events.
To the sound of singing and cheering, Pope Leo XIV presides over his final mass in Angola, in the northeast of the country in Saurimo. Addressing a crowd of 60,000 strong, 40,000 on site and 20,000 in the surrounding area, he once again condemned tyranny from the rich and powerful and blasted the global exploitation of Africa's resources.
We can see today how the hope of many people is frustrated by violence, exploited by the powerful and defrauded by the rich. Consequently, when injustice corrupts hearts, the bread of all becomes the possession of a few.
Saurimo is the capital of the historically marginalized Lunda Sul province and is close to Angola's largest diamond mine, Katoka, which extracts around 75% of the country's diamonds. Independent since 1975, the Portuguese-speaking country is one of Africa's top producers of crude oil and precious stones. Yet, 1/3 of its population lives below the international poverty line. Earlier in the day, the Pope visited an elderly care home where he was greeted with a traditional welcome dance before blessing the home's staff and residents.
Beloved brothers and sisters who live inside this house, I thank you very much for your reception, full of faith, which touches my heart and gives me great comfort in my mission. Thank you.
The pontiff ended his last day in Angola by returning to the capital, where he met with members of the clergy and discussed the challenges facing the Catholic Church. On the 21st of April, he will head to Equatorial Guinea for the final leg of his 11-day African tour.
The Congolese government and the M23 rebels have made progress in peace talks held in Switzerland. Both sides have agreed to ease humanitarian aid deliveries and release prisoners within 10 days. A U.S. brokered peace agreement was signed in December, but fighting has continued. Emmett Livingstone in Kinshasa has more.
After months of stasis, there's finally been some progress in peace talks between the Congolese government and the M23 rebels, who are backed by Rwanda. The peace process between Kinshasa and the rebels began in Qatar last year, after the M23 captured the two largest cities in eastern Congo. Although both parties signed a declaration of principles in July, this did nothing to stop the conflict. But over the weekend, after meeting for another round of talks in Switzerland, Congo and the rebels said that they had agreed to protect humanitarian work in eastern Congo. The parties also said that a planned prisoner release, which is an important confidence-building move, would begin within 10 days. And perhaps most importantly, the first missions to monitor a ceasefire that's supposed to be in place between the two sides could begin as early as this week. For peace talks that some observers had written off as dead, this represents progress. But it remains to be seen whether it leads to anything on the ground. promises and timelines have routinely been ignored over the years in the M23 conflict by all parties.
In other news, Pan-African activist Kemi Seba has applied for political asylum in South Africa, where he is being held for immigration violations after his arrest in Pretoria last week. He's also wanted in Benin under an international arrest warrant for allegedly supporting a failed coup in December. Benin special prosecutor says an extradition request is being prepared, while Seba's legal team argues no formal request has yet been submitted. A bail hearing is set for April 29. In the meantime, Seba will remain in custody. Ghana has launched an initiative to provide free primary health care, including annual screenings and the establishment of over 3,000 small clinics across the country. Ghana already operates a national health insurance scheme, which has significantly improved access to health care. However, gaps remain with underserved areas and segments of the population still lacking adequate access to health services. Here is our Ghana correspondent, Justice Baidu.
The new policy by Ghana's government announcing free primary health care in the country has been criticized and praised in almost equal measure. The government last week handed out equipment like motorbicycles, tricycles, and other tools that it says health workers would be traveling with and working with, especially in hard-to-reach communities, to deliver preventive health care. Critics have mocked these equipment and the initiative, questioning the government's commitment towards the program. This has even forced the president to rebut.
They are vehicles for the health workers who are engaged in the primary health care program to go to the village, deliver vaccinations, and then also to do health screening, test people's high blood pressure to see if it's high, test their sugar level to see if they are developing diabetes. That is what those vehicles are meant for.
The government says it is planning to spend around 100 million euros a year to finance this program. Ghana already has a national health insurance program that has been trying to make health care free since 2003.
For those of us who find ourselves in rural areas where our colleagues will have to travel for a long distance, work for a long distance before reaching out to people. If government is able to solve these challenges for us, we will be happy. So we are asking government to just stick to their words and get the challenges resolved, and the policy will be a success. And it's to the benefit of all of us.
Ghana is one of the leading countries in West Africa facing huge problems with non-communicable diseases like cardiovascular disease, obesity, and cancers. And it is these diseases that the country is seeking to address with the introduction of preventive health care.
Now to Mali, where ongoing insecurity driven by armed groups has forced a record number of refugees to flee to neighboring Mauritania. UN data shows over 1,000 people cross the border each week. But with international aid declining, refugee camps are struggling to cope with the growing influx. Facing dwindling assistance, many refugees are now heading to Nouakchott, the capital, where local organizations are stepping in. Our correspondents Simon Martin and Sarah Sacco report.
A few cups of tea provide comfort under a makeshift tent on the outskirts of Nouakchott, on the west coast of Mauritania. These families have arrived from the Mbera refugee camp, more than 1,000 kilometers to the east. Originally from northern Mali, they first sought refuge there after fleeing violence under Malian army allies, the Russian group Afrika Korps. But conditions in the camp quickly became difficult.
Assistance there is really insufficient, and there's nothing else to survive on. They gave us 5 kilos of rice per month, but for large families, that can be eaten in just a day.
Last year's US funding withdrawals mean things like food rations have been cut. Abdurrahman, a community elder, has been living in Nouakchott for more than a decade. In just the past few days, more than 200 people have arrived at his home alone.
The only work they can find here are security jobs. But sometimes people search for months without finding anything. They're really desperate.
With resources stretched thin, local support networks are emerging, like this small shop in the city centre.
Every time we sell something, we send some money so people can eat in the refugee camp. We've really had enough of this hardship. We just want to go back home, to live and work there.
But as Mali remains unstable, so does the future for the more than 400,000 refugees currently living in Mauritania.
In Zimbabwe, around 8,000 schools are in the process of receiving internet. Under the presidential internet scheme, thousands of antennas are to be installed in rural areas. The project, which started at the beginning of the year, could transform the lives of children, many of whom have never seen or used a computer linked to the internet. Caroline Dumais, Farai Mugano and Eunice Masson report.
This small school lies 150 kilometers from Harare. Installing the internet here took nearly 3 weeks as solar panels had to be set up to provide sufficient electricity. With limited access to data and the internet, this principal welcomes the presidential scheme. Students can now access online resources.
In the past, we used to use the chalk and the blackboard, but now we can use the computer to research. Whatever you read from the textbook, you can actually Google it up and see actually the pictures from the world itself.
Secondary school pupils are the first to celebrate internet access. This young student is eager to learn how to use a computer. At home, her access is limited.
I have to ask to use my grandmother's phone to read and do research on the internet. Sometimes when I get home from school, the phone has no battery or no data, or my grandmother needs it.
The Teachers' Union welcomes the effort while highlighting the continuous divide between more privileged urban areas and rural communities.
We are seeing urban schools getting a little bit advantage over the rural schools. Why? The urban schools have sufficient energy for the learners to get plugged into their computers. That is one fundamental that they have. They have also access to internet transmission in the urban environment.
Around 8,000 schools are expected to receive broadband in a country where fewer than 15% of its public schools have access to the internet.
And a bit of a good news for children. Well, that's it for this edition of Eye on Africa. Thank you for watching.